Hello.
Hi,
How are you?
good. How are you?
Good, good. Are you Chris?
Yeah,
It's my friend's dog right over there. Hold on just a second. Hold on. I'll be right with you. So how's it going?
good. Thanks for willing to do this.
Sure, absolutely. Not a problem.
I was really surprised that even with how many cons you've done, that you haven't really done an interview before.
You know, it's funny. I haven't done many cons. The last one I did was really the first I've done in, I want to say, about 7 years or so, 6 or 7 years. And I'm just starting to, I've recently got someone who's a representative and is getting me more cons. So I'm actually going to be starting to do more of them in the future. But it had really been a long time. The last one I did, I think, was the first, like I said, since for 7 years or so. So yeah, it's kind of new and I'll be doing more of them.
Okay, yeah. Also, I could just jump around then with your career.
Absolutely, of course.
So did everything start with a theater for you?
Yeah, that was where I really got interested in acting. I started to act just in community theater and school theater when I was in elementary school, and then did some stuff in junior high and high school. And I did some theater in my hometown in Massachusetts for a while, and then I moved to New York City to go to acting school in 1992 when I was about 22 years old. And I lived there until just a couple of years ago. So yeah, so it started with theater for me, and then doing voiceovers just kind of happened as an extension of that, and it wasn't something that I had thought of doing or had an idea to do. I just happened to meet someone at my place of work and my day job, and he ended up being a connection for that kind of thing. So really, yeah.
And was there ever any aspiration to move to LA early on?
No, I've never done the LA thing. I think although the weather is certainly lovely there, but I think personality wise, I'm definitely more of an East Coast person.
Okay.
So I've always been on the East Coast, and of course, if I get work in LA, I would go there. But mostly,
Are you also in SAG?
I think the first way that I got into SAG was through getting my first national commercial, which I ended up being cut out of, unfortunately.
Oh,
But yeah, I had done, I think, two commercials, and I think it was a deal where on the third commercial you had to join, the union. And so at the time, I think I was kind of shocked because it was kind of pricey. It still is, but so yeah, I kind of was forced to. I knew that I would join up with the union at some point, but it happened through getting a commercial, and I got my third one, and that's when I had to join up. Yeah.
so then in terms of anime, I think one of your first roles or your first one had to be in Heroes Greenwood.
That I think might have been my second one. Yeah, I think I did Record of Lodoss War.
Yep.
I think I played Etoh in that, and that was completely by chance because I was working in a record store at the time, and I met a guy who had done a number of voices, and he looked familiar. And as it happened, I used to see him on a television show back in the day, and he said, "Oh yeah, I was on that for a little while." And
You're talking about Bill?
oh, that's right. That's right. Oh, yes, because you did interview Bill. Yes. So he was he came into this this record store, and at the time I was in the video department, and he looked so familiar to me, and I had seen him on All My Children. It was years previously, and he just kind of started talking and asking questions, And eventually he had me in to audition for Record of Lodoss War, and my first audition for voiceover, and I got it. So it was, that rarely happens, but yeah, but that's when I first found my way into doing voice acting.
I have found that people who had theater experience took to anime dubbing easier. Was that your experience?
I don't know whether it was because I had done theater or not. I think it was just something where my voice fit, and it just happened to work. I will say though that it seems that a lot of the people that I knew who started doing voiceovers and kind of came up around the same time, a lot of those people did have theater training or theater experience. So that is possible. But I think for me, I just kind of, the voice came naturally to me. I think the voice was fairly close to my own voice. The first couple of voices that I did were basically just my voice.
Okay.
And so it just happened that way, you know?
I think your first villainous character would have been in Slayers.
Oh God, it might have it might have been. There were so many, and I actually have forgotten so many of the titles that I did at that time. But do you know the character's name? Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, Zangulus.
Zangulis, yes. I was going to say, is that what it was? It could very well have been my first villain character. Yeah, and that was fairly early on too. I think that was what, 96 or something like that. Yep. Yeah.
And then Battle Arena Toshin then was.
That's right. Yes, that was around that time too. I had a bunch of titles around that period there between about 94 and 98, 99, that kind of thing. But yeah, I haven't thought of that one in a long time. Yes. And I think Bill might have directed Battle Arena Toshinden, I think, if my memory is correct. Yeah, did he? Okay. Yeah. Amazing.
Is there much that stands out about? I know it was a smaller part, but in Revolutionary Girl, Utena.
You're taking me back now, and I don't really have any particular memory of that one.
Okay.
There were some projects that I worked on that just went very quickly, and they were kind of one after another. And as soon as they were done, they were done. So, it's an interesting thing. There are certain roles at that time that I remember, and others where I'm just like, wow, yeah, it sounds familiar. And I worked on it, but I don't remember much about it. Yeah.
Well, it was funny back when I interviewed Megan Hollingshead, and I brought up Madara. She didn't remember Madara at all until I said that you were in it. It's
a funny thing. I'm sure that you could probably rattle off my resume, and I would say, oh, that sounds familiar, or no, I don't remember that one.
Yeah.
So it's funny because I think we all did so many of them. And a lot of them were, some were projects that were more memorable than others for whatever reason, whether it is that they were more successful or just, I just have a clearer memory of doing those, but there were so many of them, at that time.
Is there more of a special story of how you first became involved with Pokemon then?
Well, yeah, I think so, because, it was just, I heard they were having auditions, and I'm sure to all of us at that time, it was just another opportunity. We didn't know anything about the show, and I certainly didn't know that it was a huge thing in Japan already. I had never heard of it. And I remember auditioning for it, and getting on the show, and I did a couple of roles at the time. I did Giovanni, the kind of shadowy leader of Team Rocket there, and I'm not sure if you know this, but I actually did the role of James from Team Rocket for like the first 5 or 7 episodes or so, and then I left because I was just like, oh well, it'll probably be just another show and whatever. And I left to do summer stock. I left to do a play.
Oh,
And when I did that, Eric Stewart took over the role,
right.
and kept the role for quite a number of years. But I remember it suddenly being this huge thing that we just didn't expect to happen. And I remember going to the preview for the first movie, and I think it was held at the Ziegfeld Theater in Manhattan. And I remember there being just tons of kids there, and they were very excited and signing a lot of posters for kids afterwards, and it was this big deal. So it was really strange, because certainly at the time, none of us expected that this was going to be a phenomenon, and of course it was. Yeah. And what's funny is that it was just another job for us, and it ended up being a very successful thing that happened. But many years later, it was just, oh yeah, Pokemon, yeah, that was really big. And of course we knew it was still on and that kind of thing. But what had happened was that all of those kids that watched the show were now in their early and mid 20s.
Yep.
And suddenly, in doing theater, I started meeting a lot of them. And they would say, oh my God, you were on Pokemon? What? And suddenly I went, wow, I really did have quite an impact on these kids' lives, and I was reminded of how huge it was.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of it was really a lovely thing to suddenly start meeting all these kids that were now young adults who remembered the show fondly, and so it was great. It was huge. Of course, it's still popular too.
Well, you still get to be part of the series, right? You're still actively.
Yes, I am still Giovanni. Occasionally, I go in to do that, but that's been it. It's been a while since I went in to do the show. So every now and then, like some odd months, I'll get a call and say, okay, Giovanni has a couple of lines or whatever. But it's been a little while, so yeah.
Well, and speaking of playing actual Pokemon, how did you vocally approach like Snorlax and Gengar?
Wow, yes, you have done your homework. I think it was basically because I think I was working with one of the original directors at the time. His name was Michael Hagney, and who also directed Greenwood, I think.
Yep.
And I just remember when these Pokemon would appear, and a lot of them, of course, were appearing for the first time because it was early on in the show. And I think we just kind of would try stuff out and see if it worked, and really it was just kind of saying, okay, let's try this. Okay, try something, and he'd look at the character and say, like, it looks like, Gengar is kind of, almost like a Tasmanian devil kind of looking thing. And so really we would just kind of go off of, I think it's been a while, but I think we probably listened to the original Japanese and kind of approached it in a similar way. Maybe doing our own slightly more Americanized take on it. But I think it would be a combination of hearing the original Japanese and, coming up with our own ideas and kind of putting those together.
And related to that, what do you think is the case where you've had to alter your voice the most significantly for a role?
Wow. I think, let's see. That's always the most fun for me. I think even as a stage actor, I'm more of a character actor, so I enjoy doing stuff that's very different from me. And I that goes for voice acting as well. And I think for me, it was probably when I was doing Kirby. I don't know if you're familiar with that at all, but Kirby was different because I got to do King Dedede and I got to do Escargoon, and those were fun roles and very not at all like my regular speaking voice. And so it was always kind of creating these characters, and it was again it was such an early time for all of these shows. It was really the first kind of it was a golden age, really, of English language dubs being done in New York City around that time. And so really it was kind of fun to create these voices, and you know, it would be a combination of us kind of talking to the director and him saying, do you have someone, you know, do you have something in mind, or I was thinking more about something like this, or try this, or whatever, and we would just come up with it. And so, you know, it was a really fun time.
Well, it is very interesting that, and I'm sure you've gotten this a lot, but how, of course, Bakura and Yugioh is voiced by a woman in Japanese, but a lot of people prefer your take.
Do they? I know that it's a popular character, but I did not know that. I actually did not know that the originals were voiced by a woman.
Oh,
I had no idea. Yeah, that's really interesting to me. But yeah, I just know that there are a lot of fans of the character, so I must have done something right. So.
Do you find it hard to relate to his character?
Well, I mean, it's you know, when you do a lot of these kinds of shows, it's you know, they are their own universe,
Right.
you know, and so although there are certainly relatable things in terms of, you know, friendship and doing stuff for your friends and supporting your friends and doing the right thing. I mean, those things are obviously things that everyone can relate to. But, you know, the universe of the show is so different.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is, it's a, you know, it's this kind of created world of, you know, in anime. And so, yeah, it's really about kind of going in the booth and entering that world, and you know, I relate to the most simplest aspect of, again, of, like, you know, supporting your friends and, you know, friendships and that kinds of thing. But yeah, it's pretty far from my experience, and really it's about, you know, being more imaginative than anything.
Mm-hmm. So. Do you think that you have a single favorite line as him?
Oh gosh, as Bakura, I would say maybe it's Welcome to the Shadow Realm. The one that I think of most often when people ask me to, like, write a quote from the show, that's the one I think of. I'm sure there are a lot of other ones, but yeah.
Well, speaking of larger characters that you've had a lot to do with, who do you think that you personally relate the most to, if there is anybody?
If there is anybody that I relate to, you know, I have to say that I probably relate the most to Bakura, not Yami Bakura, but just regular old Bakura.
Yeah.
Because he's rather soft spoken, and he's kind, and he's always there for his friends, and it's really when he becomes Yami that you know, other aspects of his personality come out. And but for me, I think I'm probably relate the most to Bakura, as you know, I'm not someone that is, you know, starved for attention, and you know, everyone has a dark side, obviously, but I don't often, I keep that kind of for myself. So I don't show that often. So I think I'm certainly a gentle kind of a guy, and I think he is too. So I think I relate the most to that, you know.
What about Prince Niari, Gokudo? Do you remember that?
God, that's a tough one. I don't remember much about that one, you know. Yeah. I wish I did. I wish I could help you, but yeah.
Well, this was relative more recently, but you had the male lead in Iki Tosen.
Oh yes, that's right. Yes, that was a great one. And yeah, it's really fun, you know, to do these, because you just kind of get to explore different sides of your own personality, and you know, it's kind of a imaginative, and it's just fun, you know. It's fun to do it, you know. Yeah, that's a great one.
Well, what do you think has there been a case where you've had to go to a dark headspace?
Yeah, there was a project that I did. I think it might have been toward the late 90s. It was called Now and Then, Here and There, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I played the male lead in that. And I remember that was one of my best experiences of doing a voiceover work. I just remember it felt very honest and relatable. And I just remember just kind of telling this character's story. And it really wasn't a reach for me in terms of the voice. It was kind of my own voice, but it was very honest. And I think there were a lot of brutal things that were happening to this kid, and he went through a lot. And so I remember that, and I remember it being very satisfying as well to kind of go to these intense places, you know. And I don't get an opportunity to do that so often because these shows are all about kind of adventure and this, that, whatever, and you know, battles, Pokemon and Yugioh and things like that. But that was a different kind of thing. So that was fun, and that still remains one of my favorite characters that I voiced.
Do you also think that you have a personal preference on working on more grounded series like that opposed to comedy, or?
Well, I love both of them. I think I probably those are probably the things I love the most, are grounded characters that are kind of truthful and relatable, and that's great. But I also love being able to do comedy. I love doing comedy. So if I have a character that's funny, like when I was on Kirby, I was able to do a lot of funny stuff on Kirby, and that's really enjoyable to me too. So those two are probably the things that I like the most.
Okay.
You know, kind of grounded, realistic, more intense, kind of dramatic stuff, but also being able to do really funny character voices and have the material be really funny as well. Yeah.
Well, another pretty early one that you had a central character in, it is more grounded, but it's a fantasy series, RG Beta.
God, oh man, you have done your job, man. I should have looked at my resume and reminded myself. A lot of these I did them and I have not watched them. I mean, it's crazy. So they're kind of lost in the fog of my memory, you know. And now I'm so much older now that I'm forgetting a lot more.
Is that the same thing with the detonator organ?
I'm afraid so.
Okay.
There's so many. There are so many of them, and it's funny because I remember I had to come up with a list of credits for some kind of a bio for something. I don't know if it was a convention or something, but I went on IMDb, and aside from the fact that there are some on there that I'm like, no, I didn't do that, because people like put stuff on there, but aside from that, I look at all of these projects that I worked on, and it's incredible. There were so many of them, but they were so long ago, and I have no memory of doing them.
Okay.
I remember there was one, I forget which one it was. I think was it Gaukaiser or something like that. And the one thing that I remember about that is, I think it was that one, that I had an insane head cold that just was, and it was awful, and I had to scream, and I was so sick.
Yeah, because you were the main character in that.
Yeah, well, I think if you listen close, you can hear a very, very sick young guy who was just like, had terrible amounts of congestion and was just trying to get through the session without, keeling over in a fever. So yeah.
Well, I think your first video game would have been Valkyrie Profile.
Probably was. I think I know I did Pokemon Stadium.
Yep.
And I'm not sure if that was before or after that one, quite honestly. I just know that that's the first one that I remember doing. So it could have been around the same time. I know I did a handful of those. And it's funny, occasionally I'll bump into people that'll find out that I did voiceovers around that time, and they'll be video game aficionados, and they'll say, your voice sounds so familiar. Did you do whatever? And I'll be like, oh yeah, yep, that was me. Yep. Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, you had a really fun character in Shadow Hearts too.
Okay. Okay. That sounds familiar. What do you know what year that was?
That was 2001.
2001. Okay. Oh man, I'm so bad. I'm giving you the worst possible interview. This is terrible. But
Oh,
there's so many of them that I have forgotten. It sounds vaguely familiar, but I just don't know what I did in it. You know, like so many of the characters are kind of, yeah. It's tough to remember. Like some of these, it's you're taking me back, and unfortunately, it's like I'm not being able to answer questions. It's terrible.
well, I know it was different with dubbing games back then, that there weren't any pictures. There were just lines.
Yeah, pretty much. You'd have to kind of. I think they would. I know that there were a few that they would have. You'd get a line of dialogue, and they would have you read it kind of 3 times,
Mhm.
and sometimes they would say, you know, if you can read it somewhat different each time or whatever, and then you'd get kind of used to doing that and whatever. But yeah, there weren't a lot of pictures. I know that there have been some Yu-Gi-Oh video games over the last few years where there was some picture, but some others where there was not, where I was basically doing it on by remote, remote from the studio. So yeah, but a lot of times it was just basically getting a line of dialogue and then repeating it 3 times, and they'd give you adjustments and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I have also heard from other people in the New York scene back then that I don't know if I don't know if this ever happened with you, but every time that they showed up to dub adult anime, they weren't aware that that's what they were doing until they got there.
You know, I have to say, I heard horror stories, but I did not do, and I think it's called hentai or something
Yeah.
like that. Hentai. And I never did any of them, but I had a lot of friends. A lot of the people that I was doing voiceovers with had done some, and it was. I didn't know that they didn't know that. I think that's kind of unfortunate because they certainly should have told them, ahead of time. But I never did any of those titles. I
Oh,
had friends that I knew that did them because they were just like, hey, it's easy money. And then of course I had some friends that were just like, yeah, I'm just not comfortable doing it,
right. Mhm.
And I don't remember whether it was that the opportunity didn't come to me or not, but I'm not even sure I would have been comfortable doing it. It's just I remember doing a dub of a live action horror film. It was a vampire film, and having to do an intimate scene, and my one of my good friends was directing, and it was just like, oh my god, really, do we have to?
Yeah.
And I just remember it was really difficult. So yeah, that's a tough thing to do.
Mhm.
So I can only imagine doing an entire video of that, and it's that stuff. I'm like,
Yeah.
no. Yeah.
Did you work with Michael Sir Nicholas very much?
Yeah, I did early on. I knew Michael, sure. He used to direct some one-off uh, productions. Not, I don't know that I worked with him as a director of kind of like series work. I think it was basically kind of this one project that was a couple of different parts or something like that. And I, but it's been a long time. I haven't seen Michael in years. Did you interview him as well?
No, but he's still actively doing the same thing. He's
Oh,
still,
certainly. Yeah, yeah. But I think he's been in LA for a number of years now.
yeah.
But he's a really sweet guy. Yes, yes. I did work with Michael a lot.
What about before they moved to LA? What about Liam O'Brien and Crispin Freeman? Do you know who?
I knew Crispin only slightly. I remember working with him many years ago, and I I don't know what the projects were. I think he directed me a couple of times, but yeah, I think it was maybe like 2 or 3 times many years ago. But I didn't work with him very often with Crispin, but I certainly remember him.
Mhm.
But I know he's been, I think, in LA for a while now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah, and the other gentleman, I don't remember working with.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Are you pretty close with a lot of the Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh cast? It seems like.
I am very, very close with a lot of the. Basically, I'm best friends with a lot of the Yu-Gi-Oh guys. Wayne Grayson and Greg Abbey are very close friends of mine, and Dan Green,
Mhm.
and Yeah, yeah, and of course Megan, I did a convention with her recently, and then there are others that I know that I don't see as often, but yeah, those guys absolutely. And it's really lovely whenever I get a chance to see people that did the original Pokemon years ago, because we just have that shared experience. A lot of them have moved to LA, or they're in Texas, or wherever it is that they're working now.
Yeah.
But I do see the Yu-Gi-Oh guys quite often. So yeah, and I'll be doing Capcom in Lansing, Michigan with Wayne and Greg a couple of weeks from now. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever been up here for anything, but I'm outside of Minneapolis.
Oh, are you? Okay. That's great. I have not been there, as a matter of fact, and I have a good friend who's at the Guthrie right now doing a play, and that's actually whose dog I am sitting for and house sitting for at the moment.
Oh, okay.
and she says it's just a fantastic city, and I've never been. So yeah.
Well, I could just say that, yeah, I mean, having interviewed, Dan and Wayne and Megan and Tara and Veronica, it's like I don't think there's a nicer group of people.
Oh yeah, they're wonderful. Everyone, we had a really great time.
Mm-hmm.
We all really got along, and it was really, there was a period there of doing Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh and a couple of the other titles that were being done at that time at 4Kids, and so basically we would be kind of seeing each other going in and out of a booth or this, that, whatever, and we'd all have 2 or 3 days where we'd be going to 4Kids to record stuff. And it was a period where we all saw each other all the time and had a great time together and would hang out afterwards. And it was a really lovely time. And we all had a lot of fun. Yeah. And yes, a very sweet group of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's nice.
So do you have a lot of affinity with Jack Atlas too?
Yeah, he really took off. So really, he's the guy basically next to Bakura that I think that I have the biggest following for, because he got really popular too.
Yep.
And that's a fun one to do, and it's really funny because I get questions about his accent. And it's funny because when I auditioned for him, they asked me to do an Australian dialect, which I did. And then they said, we like it. But I think I might have done 1 or 2 episodes with the Australian dialect. And then they were like, can you tone it down just slightly, where it's a little bit Australian, but not totally? And I'm like, okay. And then it just became its own dialect. I don't know, it's not Australian, it's not English, it's Jack Atlas. It's so funny. So every time I hear it, or every time I have to go back to do it for voiceover or whatever, for a video game or what have you, I'm just like, oh, this guy again. Okay. It's just most bizarre accent, such a weird voice, but yeah, people love that character. So yeah, he got really popular as well.
There is still a lot of affinity with your role in Shaman King too.
Oh gosh, what was that character?
Mikihisa, you were the dad of the main character.
Oh, that's right. Yes. We had a really good time. I remember that being a really fun one to dub, because it was 4Kids, but then they also had a side studio that was a couple of blocks from there. And I remember recording that and having a really good time recording that. I think my friend Tony was one of the directors for that show, I think. And that was a fun one. I remember, yes. Yeah, that was, I think, one of the last shows that I did for 4Kids. I think I could be wrong, but yeah, it came. I feel like that came slightly after the height of Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh, but I could be wrong. I'm not sure.
Well, I think one of the last 4Kids things was Sonic X.
That's right. Yes, Sonic X, and I actually wrote for Sonic X. I think I might have done occasional small voices, like side character voice wise for it. But I think because I wrote at 4Kids for a little while, I was an adapter. And I think I wrote scripts for Sonic X for a little while. Mm-hmm. I think that was one of the shows that I wrote for. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Well, there were some other anime early on that you also wrote for too, right?
I wrote for the ones that I remember writing for were I wrote for Kirby. Um, I wrote for Kirby. I wrote for Sonic. I wrote for, I want to say there was a show called, was it Mew Mew Power or something, which was another one of the later 4Kids shows. And yeah, I don't remember. I don't know. Maybe you know, but I those are the ones that pop into my head.
Mm-hmm.
I think I wrote most for. I want to say I wrote most for Kirby, maybe second most for Sonic. Yeah.
Well, you also wrote for Yugioh a little bit.
Okay, that's possible. There were, because I know that there were a couple of shows that I did a few scripts for, but like not a huge amount. Those, I think those ones that I mentioned were the main ones that I did write for.
And it looks like you also briefly directed some of Pokemon.
Yes, but I didn't direct a huge amount of them. I remember directing a couple of episodes. I think what had happened was that we were either in between directors or they were kind of shifting things around, or it could very well have been that one of the guys was on vacation for a couple of weeks or something. But I think it might have been like, I could count on maybe one hand the amount I directed. So I didn't direct much, but I do remember doing it a couple of times. Yeah.
I'm sure
I'm telling you, my memory is just shot.
No, it's okay. Well, I'm sure it's really fun in recent years with Pokemon being directed by Lisa.
Oh yes, she's amazing. That girl is so talented, and she's just an insanely hard worker. And so yeah, like over how many years now she's been the main woman there that's directed for Pokemon, and she's incredible and sweet and insanely talented and hardworking. And yeah, I haven't seen her because I know she moved to LA, so I miss seeing her. But she's an amazing human.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it does sound like, based off everything you've said so far, it does sound like your experience since you've started doing anime dubbing has been overall positive.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's really nothing that I could complain about. I have never worked with directors who I disliked. I always liked my directors. I always had it was a fun time doing it. And it's been, very gratifying to, because for a lot of us at the time, we were young actors, and here we had this opportunity to go into a booth for a couple of hours and do voices and make some extra money. And so that was how we thought about it. It was just another opportunity to get some work. And then it just became very gratifying when we saw how popular a lot of the shows became, and how many people love the shows and the characters, and how well they know the shows and the characters. And so it's very gratifying and very sweet to know that so many people, that they made so many people happy. Yeah.
Have you consumed very much of the series that you're in, or do you not really watch?
No, I really haven't. It's kind of like watching myself on if I've done any film or television work, not that I've done much, but it's always odd to watch myself. I don't like the sound of my own voice. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. Yeah, so I never listen to my own stuff. And yeah, I've just never been a big, aside from like Studio Ghibli and that kind of thing, I've never been a huge anime guy. I think, like, for instance, like, things like Spirited Away and Howl's Moving Castle and that kind of thing, but they're a little more epic. And God, what did I see recently? It wasn't Perfect Blue, but it was another really incredible Japanese animated film that I forget what it was, but it was really amazing. So, but like series anime stuff, yeah, it's just not my cup of tea, but makes a lot of people happy. So
yeah. So it does look like you still actively work in theater too.
Yeah, it's been a while. I was a part of a company in New York for the last 10 years or so. Um, but COVID kind of changed the landscape of that a little bit. And so
Mm.
the last time that I was on stage was actually in 2019, right before COVID happened.
Oh, okay.
And I've had another couple of opportunities, but it just didn't work out in terms of, I'm married and living. Now it's kind of like I'm a little more choosy as to like, okay, do I want to do this? Do I want to be at home? Or if I really am excited by a particular project, yes, I'll go and do that. But it hasn't really happened at this point. And I've been concentrating a little more lately on writing,
Okay.
in terms of short stories and essays and some working on a play at the moment. And so I've been concentrating more on writing of late, you know? Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that's coming up that you can safely talk about that you're part of, or?
Gosh, I don't think I can. I think whatever's out there is out there at the moment, but hopefully there'll be some other stuff, coming around the bend. So we'll see. I did work on a short film only a couple of weeks ago. But and that was really fun, but I don't think anyone will see that one until maybe another year or so.
Okay.
Uh, but it's yeah. So whatever. Well, hopefully other stuff will come along, and
Mhm. Well, my final question is always asking, what do you want your legacy to be?
my legacy. I would say I want people to remember me um, as a good person, as a good friend, as someone who was wise and caring. Um, I'm not sure whether it has anything to do with myself as an actor. I think really it's more about being a person that people remember and speak well of, and that hopefully I've been a good friend to people and spread some kindness. So yeah.
Well, I can imagine that there's probably been a few instances where people told you about how your performances in Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon saved them in some way.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've met people at conventions that talk about that, and I was doing a play back in, I want to say, about 2012, and my friend Samantha, who again, she's the actress that's now in Minneapolis, who's doing the play, whose house this is. Um, she was only about 20, 21 at the time, and we were doing a play, and someone came backstage into the dressing room and said, "Hey, Ted, were you on Pokemon?" And I hadn't thought about it in a while, and I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, this kid, I guess this kid came in, and I think he was maybe 17, 18 years old, and he was a senior in high school, and he was reviewing the play for his school newspaper, and he saw my name, and he said, 'Is that Ted Lewis from Pokemon?'" And as soon as I said that I had, my friend Samantha looked at me, and she her whole face was red, and eyes were like saucers. And I had no idea that she had been a gigantic Pokemon fan as a kid, and that it was her entire childhood.
Mhm.
And she was just a fanatic for the show, and it meant so much to her. And she had no idea that I had been on the show, and she just, for like the next day or so, she wasn't even sure, and we'd become quite good friends at that time. She wasn't even sure how to like approach me. She was so stunned by that. And another funny story about that is that I had an original Pokemon film cast jacket that I had gotten at the premiere of the first movie, and it had hung in my closet for years. And I was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with that. It's been there for years, whatever. And when I found out that Sam was a huge Pokemon fan, I was like, okay, now I know what I'm going to do with it. So I gave it to her for her birthday,
Oh,
and she was more than thrilled by it. But yeah, that's the gratifying thing about doing these shows, is when you realize years later, because at first it's just a job,
yeah.
and then you realize years later how what you did impacted people and made so many people happy, And, you know, you go to these conventions and you see so many of these kids and how they kind of found their tribe of people that loved what they loved and are so excited by it. It's very gratifying in that respect. So that's what I love about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I have my own story about that too. It's pretty candid, but because I'm a gay man too.
Yeah, as am I. Yes.
Yeah. And I remember in middle school, I guess I kind of made the mistake of like being really open about it back then. And I can remember being suicidal and just thinking that when I was about to, you know, try to do something that characters that like you play and Dan Green play, and I remember that thinking that like they wouldn't do this. So yeah, I just wanted to tell you that.
Amazing. I love to hear that. You know, you never know that you never know that what you're doing really has an impact. And I have heard other, you know, stories like that where these kids had a really tough time in school and they found these characters that they related to and that they, you know, wanted to emulate. And I think it's wonderful. And thank you for sharing that with me. That's amazing. And I'm glad you came out the other side.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, thanks. I'm glad that we got to do this.
So am I. And thank you for being so patient, because I'm so rarely on Instagram, but I'm gone a little more of late because, again, I'm doing more conventions coming up. So I'm going to be, I think, interacting with more fans now. So I'm glad that we were able to put this together.
Yeah. Well, I'll be sure to send it to you once I have it up if you want to see it.
Great. I'd love to.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much and have a good one. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Okay. Bye now.